Hey everyone, Curse Deck Builder here, making our way to 10,000 decks assisted. And right now we're looking at our second donation deck of the week with Zirda, the Dawnwaker. This deck comes to us from Sharok, who says, I just completed the deck and it feels like something is missing, or maybe it's going in the wrong direction. I'm not entirely sure. I was looking to get some feedback on if the build is viable or not with the commander and the strategy Zerta gives, and how to improve upon what's already there, and what changes should be made. And as for budget, they said, was looking to keep it under a budget of $15 to $20 at most, per card at most to add. Absolutely, we can work within that. Thank you so much for supporting the channel, and we're going to have a lot to talk about the deck right away, so let's just get right into it. If you'd like to take a look at the deck list we're talking about today, or if you'd like to submit your own deck list to me so that I can make a video assisting your deck, please check the video description down below. So who is Zirda the Dawnwaker, and why are they our commander in this activated abilities deck? Well, they are a 1 hybrid white-red, so 3 mana in red and white elemental fox. They are a companion. We're not using them as a companion, so we can ignore that text. But they have the ability that says, abilities you activate that aren't mana abilities cost 2 less to activate. This effect cannot reduce the mana cost to less than 1 mana, and a second ability of 1 tap, target creature can't block this turn. So, Zirda is almost universally used for this ability right here, to reduce the cost of activated ability. And they are used with a bunch of infinite combos to make an enormous amount of mana to win the game all at once. And going back to the deck, let's immediately hone in on the elephant in the room. Sharok is talking about how it feels like there's something missing or it's going in the wrong direction. I would argue this deck is having a bit of an identity crisis, and if not that, definitely a power level crisis. See, the thing with Zirda is an incredibly powerful commander for its super specific combos, namely with Basalt Monolith. I think also Grim Monolith, but Grim Monolith is like a $300 card last I checked, so let's just talk about Basalt Monolith. Here's the simple idea. Basalt Monolith generates 3 mana and is 3 mana to untap. Not quite sure how this was designed to work fairly. Like, obviously, you know, this is a card that's meant to be broken because it doesn't untap on your untap, so you have to just funnel its own mana into itself. Of course, Zirda reduces the mana cost on that 3, making it a 1, which means you go up 2 colorless mana every single time you activate the Basalt Monolith. And what's really fun about this is even if your opponents have interaction, I believe they need like 3 pieces of interaction, because you generate 3 mana, then you use 1 of it to try to untap it. They try to interact with the trigger, you try to untap it again, they can try to interact with the trigger, and then you have a 3rd chance to untap it to go infinite. The thing is, it doesn't matter because as long as you untap it once, they can't interact with this tap ability because it's a mana ability, which will always allow you to go and get that infinite colorless mana unless they have the 3 interaction points. And so, decks tend to be around this Basalt Monolith game plan. Things like Walking Ballista, things like Giant Meteors, it doesn't really matter. The idea is you're using a source of like something to dump infinite mana into to immediately win the game. So that's like the ceiling of Zirda, but it is also kind of the floor for Zirda. And that's a weird thing to say. You know, when we talk about commanders, we often think about them on a power scale, right? Like if I was bringing out, you know, let me just think. I have, trying to think of someone with a wide scale. Let's say Queen Marchesa, right? Queen Marchesa is one of my favorite commanders. Mardu, she has a very wide scale of power. You can play her politically, you can play her as Pillow Fort, you can play her as Reanimator, spells matter. There's so much you can do with her. Monarch matters, and there's a very like wide net you throw when you tell someone I'm playing Queen Marchesa. So that often people will ask, okay, but what kind of Queen Marches? And you can tell them, like, pretty strong, I'm trying to do infinite combos, or you can say, oh, super, super dumb, just like low to the ground stuff. The thing with Zirda is because Basalt Monolith is so cheap as a $5 card, and so accessible, and so easy to grab, every Zirda deck runs it. Which means every Zirda deck, to an extent, operates with an infinite mana combo. That's pretty aggressive, and therefore, almost every Zirda deck is defined by this combo. So let's start there. Looking at this combo, we immediately start noticing that there are parts of the deck that do not match that power level, right? For example, an easy one is Furnace Gremlin. Furnace Gremlin is a creature for 2 mana, with a 1 and a red ability to increase its power. With Zirda out, that just becomes red. And then we just start increasing, right, the power level of the gremlin over and over and over and over again for red mana each time. When it's about to die, we turn that into a ton of the incubators, and then it's just one. It's just one giant incubator, which we then transform into one Phyrexia. That's a lot of work for just one big person. That's like reasonably 6 to 12 red mana to get like a 6/6 to a 12/12. Like that's not really that good, right? But you might say, well, Cursed, that's not the only way we do it. If you come down here, we can see we have Stonework Pack Beast. And Stonework lets us turn all that colorless mana that we have an infinite amount into colored mana, which we can then dump into and I say, hold on. If we have infinite colorless and colored mana, are we really using Furnace Gremlin as our payoff, right? It just feels a little inconsistent. And we can see that with Walking Ballista, which is an incredibly strong card to dump infinite mana or even some mana into. With Zirda, we just pay 2 mana to continuously grow it. It gets better and better. And we even have Helioid out here for an infinite combo between the two of them. So we might go, okay, well, there's the power again. But still, on the other hand, we're playing something like Night Rampager, which is a 6/5 trampler that when it goes to combat attacks someone randomly, and when it dies, it deals damage to someone. Do you see, like, there's a lot of inconsistency in its power of the deck and its plan. So, without going too far in the deck, I want to start with the idea of finding the identity of this deck. What does it want to be, and how does it want to get there? Right now, it feels like there's 2 main directions that we can go into pretty easily. One is just give in to the Basalt Monolith and go full Basalt Monolith. Everyone knows what you're playing. No one needs to be convinced out of it or worry about whether it's worth killing Zirda. You tell them it is worth killing Zirda. This is a Basalt Monolith deck. I aim to have infinite mana, and I aim to win with it. This is probably the easiest one and a really fun deck. You build a combo deck in red and white, and the rest of the deck kind of supports that. The other direction that I think is very much so worthwhile is to kind of lean more towards one of my favorite cards, Sunforger, and go into more of an equipment matters kind of deck. Getting a lot more equipment, getting a lot of different abilities, a bunch of different tutors, and a bunch of other payoffs, and a bunch of cards that work well with Sunforger, and all of a sudden we have a fun, kind of aggressive deck. There's still a lot of tutoring, there's still a lot of things you can do, but now we're attacking more often, and we have other options to go for. So that would be the other direction to go into. But, and you may have guessed this, the Sunforger deck still plays Basalt Monolith, right? This is why I really think the identity of this deck is incredibly important and incredibly useful to sit down and figure out what you're doing. If you are not interested in going into this combo, which I think you are based on what I see in the deck, but if you're someone else who's watching this video and wanted to play Zirda and saw the name of this video and was like, oh, I love Zirda, what can I do that's not Basalt Monolith? I have to tell you, you kind of gotta play Basalt Monolith. You don't want to be the person in the pod that looks at everyone else and says, I don't have Basalt Monolith, or like, I don't aim to win with Basalt Monolith. people don't care. They're just going to kill Zirda on sight. Zirda is just one of those commanders that needs to stay in the ground, and therefore you're going to be punished of playing a weaker version of a powerful commander because your opponents are just going to assume you are playing the powerful version. Looking at the deck otherwise, I think it's generally pretty good. The instants are very, very nice. A lot of the artifacts I find to be particularly powerful and fun to play with our commander. Our enchantments are mostly good. Braid of Fire feels a little cute. I don't think I would play this. Impact Tremors also feels like an infinite combo card, but we just have better options here. And then we have a bunch of things we can dump mana into. Kathara's Crusade also feels a bit unnecessary. We have other ways to win. Spending 5 mana on this feels like a lot, whereas instead things like Mana Echoes, Smothering Tithe, and the like are just much, much stronger. So, with that in mind, are there a bunch of creatures I want to take out? I think Sun Titan is a bit cute. I think Horde Smelter Dragon is also a little too cute. These are 6 mana cards in a deck that really doesn't need to get to 6 mana. It does a lot of things lower to the ground. I think these are easy cuts. Night Rampager, I don't understand. I must be missing something. Perhaps you can keep casting it, reanimating it, killing it. But even then, I think you have better options than the Rampager, so that's an easy cut. And the Space Marine Devastator, I think as well, because this isn't an activated ability, right? So this won't trigger. Yeah, so this won't work with your commander. So, though, don't get me wrong, it's powerful with infinite mana. But once again, when you have infinite mana, are you really doing this? Are you really destroying, like naturalizing, or what is it? Just destroying artifacts and enchantments? I don't think so. I think you're just winning the game. So this feels particularly bad. Yeah, I think, and even things like, okay, so once again, these are just the things. Like, Captivating Crew is a really fun card, but it doesn't push you towards winning the game. It's kind of a value card, right? You play it, you get to do some fun things with it, but meanwhile, your opponents are wondering when you're going to play Basalt Monolith, or when you're going to play like a bunch of equipment. And if I'm playing against you, playing Zerta, and you play Captivating Crew, and you steal my creatures and swing them back at me for the turn, I think I'm okay with that. I think all things considered, I'm pretty okay with that. When you're not casting Enlightened Tutor, when you're not like dropping down a bunch of equipment, when you're not threatening, Basalt Monolith or Walking Ballista, I'm generally going to be happy with the fact that you're stealing my creatures, which I think is kind of a sign for this deck. So I'm going to suggest some fun cards for both kind of strategies here, and we're going to go from there. And then we're going to revisit after that the kind of idea of the identity of this deck. So let's start with a card that I think just belongs in both sides of the deck. Just a nice easy one, Dauntless Dismantler. I think this is just a very, very powerful card. Not much to say. I think one of the main strengths you have, no matter what strategy you are playing, especially if you're playing the Basalt Monolith all in, is that some stacks or some game-wide effects such as Dauntless Dismantler, Blood Moon, things like that kind of shut down all your opponents, like their lands or other things like that. Tax effects, Thalia, Thorn of Amethyst, all of these cards can be very, very good. I'm not going to list them all here because I don't know which direction you're going into, and I'll list some other cards that I think are a little more essential to that direction. But at the moment, having these kind of cards to shut down your opponents while you buy time to assemble your combos is going to be very, very good. It's one of the best things White does, and Red is pretty good at it as well. Once again, no matter which one you play, you definitely want to play Moonsilver Key. Moonsilver Key is a very innocuous-looking artifact that says it looks for a basic land or just an artifact card with a mana ability. And I think a lot of people look at this card and just go, oh, okay, that's just fine, until you point out to them that, our monolith, what was it called again? Our Basalt Monolith or Grim Monolith. I was thinking the Grim one, but Basalt Monolith has a mana ability, right? And there are a bunch of other really good cards that have mana abilities, but in a deck like this, Basalt Monolith obviously is the target, and having what is essentially a 3 mana tutor for Basalt Monolith is pretty dumb, and you should definitely use it. Speaking of tutors, I want to talk about a few other tutors that you should be playing in the all-in side. Gamble, very, very straightforward. Tutors, discards a card, nothing wrong there. Reckless Handling also works this way at double the mana, half the cost, and only grabs an artifact, but it grabs you Basalt Monolith, and it grabs you Walking Ballista, so it's just another really, really nice tutor. Pretty good. It is unfortunate that both of these cards do discard a card, so at certain points in the game, they're just not very, very good, but in the all-in version, I think you are very, very willing to take that risk, because, well, you are betting your entire game on getting that monolith out, so you might as well risk it, right? So those ones are really easy. After that, Imperial Recruiter, and though it is almost out of a budget, I did want to mention Recruiter of the Guard. Both of these will grab Walking Ballista. They'll grab a bunch of other creatures that can be useful for your plan, but just extra tutors to get the pieces you need to go off, which I am a big fan of. So those are Imperial Recruiter, if not, is the easiest one because it always grabs Ballista, but Recruiter of the Guard is nice if you can budget for it. After that, another card that I really do like is Comet Storm, and there are other versions of this spell, but Comet Storm is always a fun one at instant speed, which just threatens to, with infinite colorless mana and 2 red, immediately wipe all your opponents off the face of the earth. And I do really like that. It's nice and clean. Instant speed is a really, really big thing, and this is just another finisher that I think is worth playing. This is something that's also worth noting, that if you go into heavy artifacts and heavy untap, shenanigans that aren't just with Zirda, where you have artifacts that are tapping for tons of mana and using keys to untap them and tap them again, Comet Storm becomes still a viable card that can do tons and tons of damage. So something very much so worth considering. Then I wanted to talk a little bit about the equipment side. Fighter Class is a really, really easy card to add in when you're playing equipment. Not only does it itself have activated abilities, which we'll get back to later, but Fighter Class tutors the equipment, reduces the activation cost, which is notable both with and without Zerta, and then finally has a kind of cute level 3. I just did a video on Bard class, and I didn't say this, and I should have. I tend to think of the last level of these classes as it's like the ultimate on a planeswalker. You don't tend to consider it when you're playing the card, but it's a nice bit of gravy on top. Here, I think it's the same thing, this kind of idea that when you have a creature, whenever you attack, you get to take out a blocker every single time. Very, very nice, but really you're playing it for these first 2 abilities. Both of them being very good in an Equipment Matters Zerta, and the second one being obviously even better with Zerta themselves. After that, I think something else you can easily play is Stonehewer Giant, which is a tutor that allows you to tutor equipment, put it directly on the battlefield. It's also notable that you could use this with you could also use Stoneforge Mystic, which I will put here. That being said, Stoneforge Mystic is a bit out of budget, still worth naming. And if you're playing one or either, Cauldron Complete obviously is a very, very accessible card, incredibly powerful, easy to cast and easy to equip when you have all of that mana, but also just making the equipment into 5 is probably enough to start equipping and attacking. I also want to talk about Sunforger a little bit, because going back to your deck, it's a lot of clicks to get back here, is that you have Sunforger, but you have a very small amount of instants and sorceries, red and white instants, and I think it never hurts to have a bit more of a variety if we are going for the slower equipment deck, because it just lets you do many more silly things, and I think it's absolutely worth it. So here are a few silly things that I like to do with Sunforger because it's very, very strong. I will note, I'm used to Sunforger in Mardu, which is very different because getting access to black spells does give a huge amount of a huge addition in power. So we are a bit lower in power, being only in 2 colors, but we still have some good ones. So Boil, I think it is just the ethical thing to do, is to boil all the islands away. Make your blue opponents regret playing against you, and make them fear every time you have Sunforger on the battlefield. A fantastic card, very, very good. After that, Deflecting Palm is really good against your opponents that have one really big hit that they're going at, or one really, really big spell. You know, whenever someone used Crackle with Power, being able to deflect that right back at them is really, really nice. And so Deflecting Palm is a nice trap to pull out. And we have another version of that coming up. But Wild Ricochet is another spell. Once again, very good against Crackle with Power. This one's fantastic because I think people genuinely forget this card exists and what it does, but the ability to not just redirect a spell but get another free copy of it is just really, really good. A lot of times when people... Now, we need one with targets, so some draw spells won't work, but if someone casts a huge Blue Sun Zenith, you're very, very happy to draw all those cards for them. So, very much so, very, very powerful, and sometimes you can kind of use it in ways you don't expect by getting two copies of a card where the first one is good, like Blue Sun Zenith. If someone says Blue Sun Zenith for 50 on themselves and you have Wild Ricochet, you may choose new targets, or you can Blue Sun Zenith them twice, forcing them to draw their entire deck and lose the game. So, something fun about that. Reprieve is another one. This can be any kind of white counterspell. Mana Tithe is good enough. There's another one, Lapse of Certainty. I don't like that as much. Reprieve at least draws you a card, so I like this a bit better. This is a pretty strong spell and can really mess up turns if you use it as a tempo card, so I do really like this. So this is a nice option to always have. And Comeuppance is the other one that I tend to like. This works very similarly to Deflecting Palm, but it does a little more. So no damage so no damage to you or anything you control, or planeswalkers. Creature damage is reflected to the creature, and non-creature damage is reflected to its owner. So this doesn't necessarily... There's certain situations where you're taking infinite damage that this can't stop, but it's pretty close. If someone has like Impact Tremors or some kind of like very specific non-creature combo they can only do once, Comeuppance is incredibly powerful because it'll destroy them. If someone is attacking into you with a really, really big army, the ability to just destroy that army for 4 mana or 2 off of the Sunforger is really, really good. So this one I do like. I really do like that they did reprint it. I had no idea Comeuppance went up to $10, so it at $1 is really, really nice. Very fun, great art. Okay, so those are the main directions I wanted to talk about. I want to come here and talk about a few other things before I close out. Just because I highlighted. Just fun note, you can't actually use this in Commander with the Spawnsire, because there is no, in Commander there's no sideboard. So unless you're playing casually with friends who will let you use this card actually doesn't do anything. Don't get me wrong, this ability is the main one you want, because if you can reduce it to 1, you have infinite, or sorry, if you reduce it to 2 with Zirda, you have infinite ETBs on creatures, which is Impact Tremors is kind of a finisher for that. But Spawnsire is 10 mana, and the really fun ability it has doesn't really work, so something worth considering. Okay, so talking about this deck and talking back about the ideas and directions to go into. One other thing I wanted to note is that there is a version of this deck where you play Zirda as a companion and not as your commander. Now, why would I suggest that? I think there's something to consider. So let's talk about what we lose with Zirda as a companion instead of being a commander. So what we lose right away is that we lose the ability to loop Zirda. After Zirda dies, they go to the graveyard, and then we just don't have access to cast them again. This isn't free. This is a real loss, and if we don't have ways to put cards back into our hand or back onto the battlefield, such as Sun Titan or other options, Helping Hand comes to mind, then Zirda's just gone forever, so we only really have one go at it. What's the positive? Well, the positive is we get to play another commander to have another strategy that we want to do. But I think kind of the positive thing is a lot of the things I've been talking about Zirda and Basalt Monolith kind of go away a little bit. When Zirda is your companion, you stop feeling like your opponents stop panicking about Basalt Monolith a little bit, which A, allows you to play Basalt Monolith stronger, but B, it also lets you play a weaker deck that doesn't rely on Basalt Monolith. It lets you still use Zirda and have fun with them and use them as the kind of secondary commander without feeling like you're going to get knocked out of every game because everyone's terrified of Basalt Monolith. There's a lot of white-red commanders. There's a few with activated abilities. I'd have to check. Say legendary, and let's put a colon. Includes Oracle. Interesting. So I need to do it like this. Did I use something else for that? There we go. And type creature. So there's definitely some here. Obviously, some equipment theme that I think are very, very accessible. I don't want to play a Transformer. And we'd be looking for one that is both red and white. And that would be a good direction to kind of go into. Brian Stout Arm was something I thought about. Commander Mustard is an option. All of these cards that are red-white or have the red and white mana symbols that you get to use as a commander with an activated ability can be your main commander with Zirda in the back, kind of hiding a little bit and getting away with whatever you want her to do. And with that in mind, I think that is a direction you can go into, not even including the fact that you can then go into a 3-color commander, right, with an activated ability, and add Zirda to that. Now, I'm not going to throw out things because that is a whole rebuild of the deck, but you can just do that to gain access to a 3rd color for like Sunforger. That could be fun, honestly, where you still play it like as a majority red-white deck, and then you are just using that last color for Sunforger spells. That can be really cool. I don't know where that stands, but I wanted to suggest that. Anyways, now that being said, there are other things we do lose when we put Zirda as our companion. Notably, cards like Smothering Tide. We lose cards such as Braid of Fire. We lose Mana Echoes, and we lose Elemental Mastery here. We lose a bunch of creatures here, from Sun Titan to, let's see, Academy Manufacturer, Aven 9 Sensor. We do lose a lot of things. We don't lose everything. And I would say the majority of your deck does still function entirely with Zirda as your companion, but I didn't want to just say, just make Zirda your companion, there's no loss. There is a loss of cards. So that's generally like the 3 directions I would go into. I think honestly going 3-color Zirda equipment with Zirda as your secret commander sounds like a lot of fun to me. We've been talking about a lot of secret commanders this week, and I think that is the most fun, but I don't know how viable it is. If you're looking for the weaker version, I say weaker in the sense like that lower power version. I think the artifact or the equipment Zirda is weaker and in a fun way and lets you play fun cards and play kind of a longer game. And then the Basalt Monolith version is just really, really strong. But trying to mix these types, these kind of identities together, is building a deck that doesn't really know what it wants to do and is going to be pressured out of games incredibly fast. So let me know what you pick. Let me know what direction you go into, and if you want, send me another draft, and then we can go wholeheartedly in that direction and see what we can build. At this point, it needs a little adjustment to get us where we want to, but I do see this being potentially just a very, very strong deck once we figure out what we want to do with it. I think that's all I have to say. Thank you so much for sending this deck, Shirok. I really appreciate it. I'm really excited to see what you do with it. And yeah, let me know what your ideas are. All right, good luck. Thank you so much for watching. This video is brought to you by viewers like you and people on my Patreon. If you'd like to send me another draft of this deck, or any deck, there is a link in the video description down below. And if you'd like to make your deck one of my donation decks I work on, there's a link there too. Finally, if you'd like to like, comment, subscribe, I would be very appreciative. It helps the channel quite a bit. Thank you and good luck in brewing and building.